Right, hello, welcome everybody to today's meeting of City of York Council's Audit and Governance Committee. My name's Councillor Hollier. I'll be chairing the committee this evening. On either side are sort of various members of the committee, and hopefully you'll be able to see their nameplates. We've got a couple of substitutions. So Councillor Burton is being substituted by Councillor Maroney, and Councillor Coles is being substituted by Councillor Baxter. So welcome. And we've got apologies this evening from our independent member, Mr. Binney. And just before the meeting as well, I'll just thank obviously Councillor Fisher for stepping into the shoes of the chair at the last meeting. Much appreciated. Obviously, we had quite a few substitutions at that meeting. So firstly, then, are any declarations of interest? Councillor Merritt.
I'd just make the committee aware, I mean, they're on my declarations form, but they're pertinent to some of the items tonight. I am a chartered engineer, member of the Institution of Civil Engineers and a member of the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transport. So I just wanted to record that. Make people aware. And also the other thing I just wanted to flag is I'm chair of the Combined Authorities Audit and Governance Committee, and there is an item that does refer to the Combined Authority. So just wanted to flag those.
Okay, thank you. Any other declarations? No. So I'll just amend the agenda slightly, seeing as we've got Councillor Stewart. We'll trial your having the minutes before the exclusion of press and public and minutes, and see if the earth does indeed open up and swallow us. So Ms. Winburn, if you'd like to join us, we'll go straight to public participation.
Members, if I may, could I please ask you to speak into the microphones? It's really quite hard to hear you back there. Gentle voices. Thank you. Chair, members, I am shocked and still struggle to understand the scale of the overspend associated with the York Station Gateway project. A reported £28 million increase in costs on a single capital project raises serious questions about governance and transparency. Overspends on this scale on a project delivered in under 2 years indicate a breakdown in governance and oversight controls. Similar weaknesses appear in other capital programmes, possibly all. Having reviewed the proposed remedial action plan, I find it too general and insufficiently targeted to the governance failures identified. More worryingly, the audit failed to identify several statutory transparency duties, ensuring expenditure decisions and contracts remain visible. Their absence made these governance failures harder to detect. Instead of specific corrective controls, the plan relies on general management activity, such as programme assurance, monitoring and training. These processes do not correct the governance failures. The plan proposes a programme assurance function, yet provides no reporting framework enabling this committee to oversee whether corrective actions are actually taking place. Monitoring arrangements existed throughout the contract period, yet a significant overspend remained unreported in project highlight reports for 2 years. That experience points to the need for stronger oversight by this committee. In reviewing the plan, I identified at least 10 governance issues where corrective action is either inadequate or entirely absent. You have these. These include the absence of officer decision records documenting major project expenditure despite statutory requirements, and the continued complete absence of a publicly accessible contract register required under the Transparency Code. These are basic governance and transparency safeguards. Taken together, the action plan fails to provide the assurance needed to correct these governance failures. I therefore ask the committee to require officers to produce a revised and more specific action plan, linking each governance failure to a corrective control and establishing a reporting framework, enabling this committee to review progress under the position until the position is properly regularised. I am disappointed that the seriousness of these failures has not been accompanied by any acceptance of responsibility or an apology from the Chief Operating Officer or either statutory officer. Finally, Chair, at full council, I raised the 10 to 30 million pound equal pay liability councils like ours are facing. It appears in our contingent liabilities, yet members receive no information. Can this finally be addressed here, please? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your comments this evening. Okay, if we move on then to item 3, which is the exclusion of press and public. So be aware that annexes 2 to 9 of agenda item 14 are due to be considered in a private session at the end of the meeting. Is there any comment or issues with that? No? Okay. I'll just note as well, I've not received any urgent business. So when we do get to that item, we'll close the meeting on the YouTube and we won't be back online. The other thing I should mention is, obviously, we've all got pink papers. If we could just be careful not to sort of flash them at the camera, because I think our staff are getting a bit fed up of spending a day messing around with YouTube videos to hide them. So just be a little careful. And then on to the minutes and action logs. If there's any comments, I'll start with the minutes, and I wasn't there, so I'll take advice on whether they're accurate. Councillor Rose.
I've got quite a few things on minutes and actions. In terms of minutes, well, one thing to just validate is the order of events. Are the minutes supposed to be in the order they're discussed or the order of the items originally? Because it is unusual to have things that refer to later in the paper, but they were earlier in time. So it's a tricky read to read things in a back to front order when reading the minutes. So that was just a kind of open question around exclusion of press and public participation, the kind of way that we did it backwards, as it were. But the specific pair of things. So the public participation by Councillor Paula Willison. There's one error I think she'll agree with me on, which is that the first line, it says she stated that it was real for the internal audit report to be damning, but what she said was it was rare for the internal audit report. And the one that I think she'll disagree with me on is that it says stated that it was rare, which I think is a valid point, but it also says that she stated that a combination of changes by executive, etc., had led to the level of overspend. I think the word stated implies that that's true, and I would prefer it replaced with said or indicated, or other words that I won't suggest. But it would be good to soften that language from making it look like that's the accurate version of events. And the reason that I want to flag that is because we then had a long discussion in exclusion of press and public, in which I address why those weren't what the papers said, and that is not in the minutes for the exclusion of press and public. There's not much in there actually in our conversation. We had quite a long conversation about why we were excluding and having some conversation last meeting, but also why we wanted to bring a version of that report to this meeting, and what else we would like in the report for this meeting, which in my opinion we haven't fully got. And it would be just good to I think revisit the paragraph around the discussion there, because it did cover the first few minutes of conversation around officers explaining what could and couldn't be addressed in public session, but it doesn't cover the rest of the conversation, which from my perspective is the other side of the same discussion. Same with it says officers also confirmed that an additional report would be brought to this meeting, but it doesn't specify what would be in that report. I think it would be useful to call it out. Those are my minutes points. I've got actions as well.
Okay, any other? I mean, I don't care whether it says stated or said, because to my mind they both mean the same thing. So,
the exact point I was going to make, whichever way she said it, and that's it. We can't argue with what she said. It's a matter of fact. If you visit the YouTube video, it's precisely what she did say.
That's a fact.
Much less debatable than the previous points. Just in the attendees list, I'm down, but not down as a substitute. I'm not a named substitute, but I was substituting in that meeting.
Okay. So if we're happy then with those changes to approve the minutes, unless there's any other comments?
You have the changes. Apologies, can we have the changes circulated before they're finally signed off, please?
Happy to arrange that. I think members just need to remember that minutes are not necessarily intended to be a complete verbatim record of what went on, so it won't necessarily encapsulate the entire debate.
Okay, so we're saving those then to sign at a future meeting. Move on then to item 6, which is the external actions. So they're not on the list. Well then, Councillor Rose.
It's only a very small set of things. Item 84 says ongoing, but I think it should have an end date. I don't think it is an ongoing, it's a point in time action. At the top of page 18, data security doesn't have an item number. The end dates in the past, those can be touched up. 103 says effect rather than affect. I think it was there previously, but I didn't spot it last time around. And we have received 107, but I'm not 100% certain it's what we were asking for. But yeah, I think everything else looked good to me on both sides. There wasn't any other question.
Okay, happy to make those amendments. Any other comments? No? Okay. So now we really will move on to item 6, which is the external audit completion report. So I think the Mazars are joining us via the magic of Zoom. I'm assuming.
Hi, Chair. Can you hear?
I can hear you, yes. If you're able to, just give a kind of brief summary of the report, and then I'll just ask the members if there's any questions to ask.
Okay, yeah, so this is our auditor's annual report, bringing together all the work we completed in the 24-25 audit. As you say, we'll take the report as read because this is the final version of the draft report that was presented to this committee in January. The key messages are: we issued an unqualified opinion on your financial statements ahead of the backstop date. Our audit opinion is attached as Annex B to your agenda pack. As with previous years, we're not yet able to issue our certificate as we are still waiting for further guidance from the National Audit Office on group scoping to complete our whole of government accounts work. And we are finalising our objections work relating to Section 106 income and procurement decisions. Since issuing the draft report, we have updated it to include another significant weakness and an additional other recommendation, which Louise will talk you through now.
Thanks, Mark. So just wanted to take the opportunity just to talk you through the recommendations that are in the report. Like Mark said, we will take the report as read. So there are 3 criteria within the VFM work, and in relation to financial sustainability, which is the first of those criteria, we've made 2 other recommendations. One is in relation to the council's delivery of savings, and one is in relation to the minimum revenue provision and ensuring that that is prudent and reflective of the capital financing requirements of the council. In relation to the governance criteria, we've identified 1 significant weakness in arrangements, and we've also made 1 other recommendation. The significant weakness in arrangements is in relation to the capital project management and governance, and specifically in relation to the York Station Gateway project. The delays in reporting the potential overspend, the weakness in project management arrangements, and the potential for reputational risk, in our opinion, highlights a significant weakness in the governance arrangements. And we've made a recommendation for improvement in relation to this, to continue to implement the actions highlighted, through internal review processes and through the internal audit review that was undertaken to strengthen governance and scrutiny arrangements to minimise project overspends and to allow emerging risks to be mitigated effectively. The other recommendation is in relation to a requested internal audit review of your home. Again, we've recommended there that the council continue to respond to the findings of the review and to ensure that there's appropriate oversight of the remediation work that's taking place. And the final criteria of economy, efficiency and effectiveness, we've raised one recommendation there. That's in relation to this council CQC report that was issued in December 2025. And again, that is to ensure that the council implements the actions that have been addressed within, that have been highlighted within the CQC findings. That was as much as I was going to say, but obviously Mark and I would be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. I'll just ask if the committee do have any questions. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, just a quick, easy one. There's the risk related to the capital project management. The reference is York Station Gateway. I just want to double check that the text is the same as when we saw this last time, when you mentioned there were a couple of other adjustments and new findings. I just wanted to validate that's the same as was.
The wording in relation to the risk remains the same. The finding and the recommendation is largely the same. There were some slight tweaks to the wording, but it is substantially the same as the draft that you previously saw.
Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Moroney.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just one very quick question. Could I ask how long you have been the external auditors for, please? Thank you.
It goes beyond my time. I've been here. I've worked on this audit for 6 years, but I think the firm took over in, I'm going to say 2015. It's been a long time.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Vassie.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. Could I just ask how many other local authorities you produce audited reports for, to get a sense of the range of your work? Thank you.
In terms of Forvis Mazars, we are the second largest provider of local audit in England, and we also have a contract in Scotland. So we are a significant player in the market.
How many local authorities are we talking about, please?
So for England, I'd have to come back to you, but it's certainly around about 40.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, it's actually a question for two of my fellow councillors rather than for Forvis Mazars, but just page 19 mentions the medium-term financial strategy and how we need to rapidly start addressing the additional savings. So it's a question for the chair of the Task and Finish group for the budget and a question for exec for finance. But are we satisfied that what we're doing and the plans that have already been started meet that recommendation already, or is there more work to be done?
Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Rose, for that. Yes, the corporate scrutiny, finance scrutiny task and finish group have their first meeting on Monday, where we will be looking at the medium-term financial strategy and savings that have been or to be delivered, and start planning for next year's budget process.
Okay.
And the quick question to Forvis Mazars is that what you guys had in mind? I know obviously we then have to meet the actual amounts that needs meeting, but is that approach one that you feel matches your expectations on that finding?
We would have to look at it in more detail. We can't base it on that comment just yet, but we will follow up on that.
Okay. I can't see any further questions, so I'll just thank you for your time this evening, and also for your work throughout the year, and also to the council officers that support you in that as well. So thank you. Then move on to item 7, which is the Key Corporate Risks Monitor 4. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, if you're just able to introduce yourself and then just give summary of the report, and I'll.
Okay, so I'm David Walker. I'm head of customer finance, risk and insurance. So Chair, I'd like to just present the Audit and Governance Committee with an update on the key corporate risks for City of York Council. These are set out at Annex A of this paper. As previously discussed, the diversity of services provided by the council means that they're faced with very many varied risks across the organisation. The council follows best practice in terms of its council management team level in focusing on the significant risks of the council's objectives. As we know, these are known as the key corporate risks. The key corporate risks remain relatively static. I think in the case of financial pressures, which is KCR1, that's as much an issue now as a risk, as the council continues to struggle with reduced funding and growing budget demand. So it's kind of in train, so to speak. In the short period between Risk Monitor 3 and Risk Monitor 4, there's been minimal changes in the overall KCRs. The few changes that's occurred are set out at paragraph 16 of this paper. As agreed at this committee in November 24, a cycle of in-depth reviews will be carried out whereby one KCI is reviewed in detail and the risk owner attends our meeting to assist in the conversation. With this monitor, we brought Key Corporate Risk 11, which is major incidents, for review. Dave Atkinson can't be with us tonight, but Steve Ball is here to present that risk. Happy to take any questions, or if you want to move on to the KCR 11, then I think Steve's happy to come and present that.
Yeah, I think if we just take any questions on the main KCR report, and then we'll come to 11 afterwards. So if there are any questions. I had one in terms of the public speaker earlier mentioned something in terms of financial pressures and the equal pay claims. I believe it's something to do with you know, workers that work to task and finish compared to people on sort of full-time contracts, and there are provisions in other councils for significant sort of sums of money to pay for that. So I don't know whether that's something that's been looked at as a corporate risk that could be included in the financial.
It will be picked up in, I would have thought, in the financial risk and KCR 1.
Yeah, it's an active discussion and a debate. We did include the contingent liability in the accounts, as the public speaker pointed out, because it's a live issue and a live discussion with trade unions, employees. It's not something that's appropriate to discuss in an open committee. In this committee, we will update as and when we are able to do so.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, there are no further questions on that one. We can move on then to KCR 11. Thank you.
Steve Ball, Resilience and Contingencies Manager, City of York Council.
Thank you. Yeah, and if you're able, I don't know if you want to present the report in any way or take it as read and just ask for questions. Or
No, I'm sure all of you have read the document I've put in relation to how we monitor and evaluate the level of risk. Risk comes in through from Cabinet Office, and we'll go down to the Local Resilience Forum. The Local Resilience Forum take a look at risks that we have across the network, and we do the same across City of York Council as well for any individual risks that we have. Any national risks that are likely to affect us, we do as a full group with the Local Resilience Forum, and anything which is separate to City of York, we would look at it. And obviously all risk here is a slightly different, especially when we talk about things like flooding, which has got mitigation in there, which is one of the and the severe weather, which has also affected us over the last few months. We have regular training and exercising as a Category 1 responder. That is something that we have to do under the Civil Contingencies Act to make sure we fulfil our duties, working with partners, making sure that we protect them and assist them when they're responding. and protecting our communities and looking after the most vulnerable people within our community. The level of exercising over the last couple of years has gone everything from terrorism to flooding to cyber attacks, pandemics, which was a national tier 1 exercise, and locally doing rest centres as well. So each of these exercises we have lessons learnt. The lessons learnt we embed with feeding up risk to each head of service and into corporate management team, and any risks that need going back into the local resilience forum. Chief Operating Officer Ian Floyd sits on the executive board with the LRF, and we'll make sure that we're accounted for at that level. We have gold officers which are trained, 4 gold officers now, which means we're more robust now in that than over previous years. And silver officers sitting underneath that provide 24/7 cover in relation to our response at the right level, making sure that we can escalate appropriately. In relation to the risks that we look at, we have a community risk register and we have the national risk register, which are publicly available for people to see and evaluate with the risk. And obviously we amplify the message for people to look at having personal plans, having household plans, business plans, including business continuity, and community plans as well, to make sure that we're all safe.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll ask if the committee have any questions. Councillor Fisher.
Yeah, could I possibly know what GESIP and methane are? Because I don't think it's actually, I just wondered what they were, because they're not.
All right, yes, sorry,
I even know the acronyms, but I don't.
Yeah, GESIP was brought about after the 7/7 bombings, where emergency services were not responding properly to an incident and discussing the level of risk. So the Joint Emergency Services interoperability principles were brought in. All agencies have to train and try and use the same language. You'll appreciate that's a lot of abbreviations and acronyms that are used across different services. So it's trying to make sure that they all use a common language when they're speaking to each other. And some of the key learnings that came out from the 7/7 bombings was that each of the emergency services had accounted for different levels of risk, including when they were going onto the underground, whether the lines were actually still live, where the trains had been bombed. And hadn't shared that information with the police and with the ambulance service. So it's to make sure that if you're aware of any risks, you share it with other emergency services, and part of that is the training. And the methane is a method of reporting in relation to the criticality of any incident. So it's an acronym which is used. So the M stands for major incident, the E stands for exact location, and there's several bits all the way through, which there is an app which is available as well, so you can download the app onto your phone, so it's publicly available to everyone, and it's just a way of recording the information for a type of incident, the number of casualties and severity of casualties, and the number of hazards that are at the scene, so that it's in a recognised format for services to use.
Thank you, that's enlightened me well.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Vassy?
Thank you. Yes, I was wondering if you could explain to us what impact or lack of impact there is on emergency planning management when 28.5 million to be spent on certain areas of government, of local government activity, move to another area. In the context of a 2-year period that we've heard of those overspends not being reported, how does that impact on the way that you evaluate risk management in the council, across the council?
All of the services do respond. Obviously, it's down to the normal financing that people have, whether it's flooding. Over the last couple of years, I've been with you now for 6 years. Over that time, we've obviously gone through the pandemic and we've had some severe floods. Out of that, we've also now got the extra flood barriers in place, which means that our level of response from highways teams has been less impactful than it was 10 years ago. So there's some things, it's all about balancing, isn't it, in relation to the level of accountability. But the more people that can have their own personal plans and business continuity plans means they're less affected by the effects of any sort of crisis that we're likely to have, or an emergency that we're going to have. And it makes them more responsible for their own recovery. It means they can operate back again more quickly. There has been several examples of that which have been local, but we've all seen, the water incidents that we've had here where people have done without water for a number of hours, and businesses have been managing to survive by going by water locally to continue the business. The same sort of thing with solar powered now, where people have got electricity, so they've got some heating in the house even when things go off. So there's several ways that there's balances. If it was on a major scale, then obviously it would seriously affect us. We're responsible for things like temporary mortuaries, which I do a lot on, and did it through COVID. And there's other things. If there was a major impact with trains and things, transport infrastructures, of course, yes, that would affect us, as would terrorism in the city as well, including the loss of people coming in, tourism and money coming in.
So is it fair to say that unreported overspends can have an impact on the confidence you have about projecting what the risks are in various areas of the...
Not in relation to the risks that we have. We've actually got more balances now. During COVID, we did have a change of staff quite early on, and we put a process through whereby we went to a shared service with North Yorkshire Council. So North Yorkshire Council has a team of emergency planners. So I buy the service in from them to make sure that we've got the 24-hour service. So that means that we probably can do change our workload during peacetime when things are not happening, and then when we do have an incident, it means we can call on more officers from North Yorkshire, because their team is far greater than anything we had, to come in and help us during that time of crisis. And that's the sort of thing that went on the Langdale fires that have just gone on the moors, where we actually allowed some of our team to go across there and help them out during that period of time. And it's the same when we have floods or anything that's going on here, they'll come in and help us. So it's that counterbalancing and trying to work it out, but it's the relationship and help from partners, which is always key in how anybody responds anyway, which is why the Jessup programme that we mentioned and the LRF, where we work closely with partners, helps out, because if you know who to call during a crisis, usually you get a better response than if you put in your hands up for a freebie. So hopefully that answers your question, Councillor.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Thanks. Useful to see the report, and thank you for your detail. The question I had is around some of the less traditional types of major incident. So during the beginning of COVID, there was a lot of break glass on business continuity and emergency response, but a lot of that ended up with in-person meetings, which, with the benefit of hindsight, and for some of us at the time, it seemed slightly ridiculous, because we were enacting a plan that hadn't necessarily anticipated that specific scenario. I just wanted to kind of call out that versus cyber, that the response to pandemic was to go much more digital, and that as a result now perhaps makes us a little bit weaker, or the cyber attack response might be less natural to us, where we try and find a way of coping without the digital space when we're very digital now. What's the difference in terms of how we prepare for those? How much do we incorporate that into business continuity? And just one very small, quick additional thing, we haven't got anything about unpredictable weather events, which in York we never really have, but the sort of earthquake, hurricane, tornado type things that you get elsewhere in the world. COVID seemed pretty unanticipated when it hit, and then it turns out there's been decades of people talking about the fact it might happen. With climate change happening, we probably should be anticipating more than just flooding. Is that something that's on the radar at all?
First of all, in relation to your last comments with COVID, it was a pandemic. There was a lot of preparation for that. So there was a lot of things on the table which we already knew about. My personal view is that there were parts of it where there was things in a plan which perhaps weren't followed in relation to the level of preparation that was there done previously. And a lot of learning came out of COVID as well, and if the same happened again now, I think the response will be totally different. Yes, it meant that we moved to more digital platforms. The fact we went to more digital platforms, certainly for North Yorkshire, when you look at the fact we've got the largest county that we have in England, And certainly when you look at how we work regionally, you know, we are the size of a country. So to be able to get people to come to meetings and engage earlier is far better. Our senior officers have all got laptops. If we decided now to coordinate a meeting, their response would be an awful lot quicker than it was then. And hopefully more effective, because you get a command structure in place right at the start of an incident. We use a system where we can bounce an email which goes to every service to notify them of any type of incident that's happening, and have different escalation levels, so everybody's engaged and informed more often. And one of our main duties on the Civil Contingencies Act is to warn and inform the public, and work and inform with partners and share information. So that's done very, very quickly and very, very effectively. And if we do need to escalate, we're far better than we have been over previous years. You're right in relation to the likes of severe weather. With climate change, we've seen an increase in the number of events. And I would say there's certain parts of the weather which have been more severe than others. Obviously, the Environment Agency, the Met Office will be experts on that, but we see the consequences of it. And basically it means that there's things like high wind, which is causing us quite a lot of problems. The rain has been for longer periods rather than short outbursts. This year, and certainly over the last couple of months, we've been quite lucky that most of the rain has fallen on the western side of the Pennines rather than our side. So the western side has taken the brunt of the weather. We haven't had a lot of impact through snow and things like that, but you remember a couple of years ago we had an extreme heat wave. You know, having a heat wave in Yorkshire is not something we've really thought of much before. So thinking we'll never get to that situation, but there was a plan there for it. And you remember that we had air conditioning units in some of the places in town as well, which is the same sort of scenario that we have during winter, where we have warm hubs for people to sit in over the winter period. So all of this planning is in place, and it's having more of an effect, and sort of crosses over what Councillor Vassy said as well, with the resources that you have are more limited, and we're working harder and we're working for longer periods over a time to respond. And the engagement with communities, as I mentioned, and with other partners is what helps us get through that process. Hopefully there was a lot that you had in there. I'm not sure if I've covered everything. If I've missed anything, let me know.
Yeah, no, I appreciate I threw a lot of sentences there. And you did answer most of it. The only two bits is the level of preparedness for extreme weather events and cyber. So, you know, as you say, we're probably anticipating similar things to what we've seen before, is generally how a lot of these work. I have no doubt that if we have a week of 40 degrees, then we'll be able to survive it. But if we had a month of 44 degrees, that's something we probably should be prepared for. Or if we have a foot of snow that lasts for a month, you know, it hasn't happened for a while, but it could happen. So it's just, to what extent do we prepare for that? And similar with cyber, if Microsoft 365 goes down for 3 weeks, if we lose all data over a year old, if the entirety of the internet drops in Yorkshire for a day, are we prepared for those kinds of things? Because they're not as impossible as they used to be.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah, in relation to cyber, yes, if you remember, Microsoft did go down, and AWS went down as well, the Amazon Web Services, and quite a lot of the media platforms are connected into them and routed through. We did feel the consequences of that. Some of the other knock-on consequences, we talk about a national power outage, if such a thing was to happen. And that would probably affect us more in relation to how we work digitally, and how people have got battery backup to be able to make sure you're charged up, and whether remote antennas and services and signals would still work. But we do have a plan to arrange meetings at a predetermined time and location after such events. We're more robust in relation to cyber attacks, and have done a strategic cyber exercise with our commanders at York, to try and face the consequences. We do look at business continuity internally, so that all of our services look at what services they can deliver, what are priority services, statutory services that must be delivered now, and how can we have a workaround to make sure that we continue to serve the public in relation to that. Some of these can be done without digital. You know, like if you're going out doing some of the services, some of them might require a tiny bit more. There's also concern with changes with the the telephone network is going to digital rather than analog, so they're less robust should you have a complete outage. And some of the more vulnerable people do rely on those services, so having those checks and balances from adult social care, children's social care, to look at the most vulnerable and have those listed. So we do keep an account which is separate for vulnerable people to make contact with those as well. So there's lots of connecting issues, and there's plans for all of them. And obviously the only way that you're going to find out is testing them in a real live incident to see whether they work or whether they're different. But there's always that the options and contingencies that we have during our planning to have different methods of doing such things. So hopefully that's.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just to add a comment of support for everything that you guys do. And half of it is the preparedness, but half of it is how to manage an incident. We're fortunate in York that we get lots of floods, so we get to test out our command response, including during times like Christmas when a bunch of people are missing, and we can test how it works when there's gaps. So we have an organic way of demonstrating we can handle incidents throughout the year. But it always works pretty well in York. I think that residents don't see quite how much work goes into keeping everything as smooth as it is. So thank you.
Okay, can't see any further questions, so thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, we could move on then to item 8, which is the update on major projects. Like, and if you're able to introduce yourselves, and then if there's a brief sort of scene setting you'd like.
Thank you. Gary Taylor, Director of City Development. Take most report as read. We had quite a detailed discussion at the last scrutiny. I appreciate a number of you weren't at that specific scrutiny. Just in terms of where we're at with this, quite a significant amount of this falls within 24-25 in terms of the audit review. The key elements in terms of the time it's taken to get to audit committee, initially the request being through Debbie back in 24-25, and then last year in order to help me in terms of putting the relevant resource in place and to address some of the key issues in around the scheme. I asked a number of additional questions of our audit provider, which are within the report attached. And then subsequently feed through in terms of the management actions and the management action plan that you have attached to this report. I have provided an update of where we're at with each of those. Obviously, the key elemental part was to work at pace to get under the skin of the specific scheme and get the resource in that we needed fairly rapidly to get under the skin of that, to realign the management processes, and also the consultancy we had wrapped around that, get those into the relevant contracts that were required as outlined in the report. We are very much in that place now, in that we've got people within the council, within my teams, representing the council. So as highlighted in here, an over-reliance on external consultants in terms of that management activity. We have weekly reporting. We've realigned all of the reporting activity in terms of early warnings. So they feed in terms of the management tiers. And we are working closely on a daily basis in terms of the reactive response to the scheme. It is very much a live scheme. It's a really very complex scheme. As highlighted in the report, it perhaps didn't start out as it might have in terms of the preparedness that should have been undertaken prior to the scheme being signed into contract, which means that in effect there's a need for additional daily resource in order to ensure that we're really on top of that. So it's taken up a lot of my personal time and the resources within the team. There is now open and transparent reporting throughout the organisation in terms of where we're at, in terms of specific changes that are required, the financial elements, with the context that we're in an NEC contract management process. So the complexities around that is that you've got to make quite rapid decisions for obvious reasons, because if you don't make those decisions, you don't make the right decisions within a specific time frame within the contract, you start to get charged quite significant sums, and they can be up to 100, 200k per month. So things events that have been very clearly reported in around the findings around the structural defects around the portico, for instance, or the findings in terms of the Victorian water storage underneath the portico. We've had to move quite rapidly with the contractor to instruct to make sure that those elemental parts are addressed in order then not to create further delays and costs. So we've had to put that resource in to make that rapid decision. I'm comfortable in terms of where we're at. Obviously, it's for yourselves to audit that position today. But I know there were specific requests in around some further detail around the contract, and just from my perspective, there was, and also organisational perspective, there was a scrutiny committee on this last year, which went through a lot of that detail. Obviously, and I'll be led by Bryn if there are, I'm happy to answer as much as I can today, but if there are elemental parts that obviously the audit committee today feel that weren't sufficiently scrutinised last year, obviously that can be referred to scrutiny accordingly, although I'll try and answer as much as I can in terms of the following session. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions, Councillor Rose?
I mean, I've got a million, but I'll blitz a few things up front. The corporate scrutiny, I went back and watched the meeting and read all the papers, and it was very thorough and useful. It was geared towards making sure that exec had the information they needed to make a decision, so it doesn't cover everything the corporate scrutiny might have considered elsewhere. It's slightly different to A&G, but I definitely don't want it to return there if we don't need to. It doesn't feel like it needs a corporate scrutiny revisit. The one thing that you discussed there and that Katie discussed as well that I thought was really useful that I hadn't caught through these papers at the last meeting or this one was about the flow of things between the different packages. So some of the package 2 and 3 in particular had a lot of change, but from what I can tell, it looks like some of the package 1 stuff moved into other areas as well. So I was trying to do a bit of, oh, this one's gone up a lot and this one hasn't gone up as much, but actually what you said in that meeting was that that's irrelevant. So that was very useful. And then the 2 bits I couldn't quite figure out from the papers that I just wanted to get your take on was there's in the papers last time around, it talks about the works agreement dated 21st of July 2022 that was the thing that would have lost us the 13 mil if we hadn't signed it, but that's not in any of the various papers and timelines other than a reference to it, and I don't know what that works agreement is for. And then the same with the August 2024 decision. Page 83 of these papers say that it was over £1 million. There's a question around scheme of delegation last time round, at corporate scrutiny last summer, that it probably shouldn't have been an officer decision. So there's that element of it, which was one of the things that corporate scrutiny had intended to send to us. Now, I don't think it actually got flagged to us at A&G that was what we wanted to talk about. But the officer decision scheme of delegation piece there, if there is that increase, that probably should have been a full decision. But also it says £1 million in these papers, and there was a lot of speculation over the pound value last year. Is it only 1 mil out of the total of the increase that was related to that decision, or is it a lot more than that? Those are the 2 things that I kind of can't figure out from the papers, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Chair. And I can certainly answer the first one. The July 22 works agreement was in relation to the early works in order to get to site. So the funding requirement was that we needed to be on site delivering the scheme. Obviously, the main contract wasn't agreed until April 23. You're going to have to remind me of the August 24 agreement.
It wasn't a contract, it wasn't an agreement. It was an officer decision that last June at corporate scrutiny, it was suggested that the reason it didn't go through any other mechanism is because it was believed to keep the total project within the budget of the total project that had been allocated. And at this time round, it now says that it's over £1 million, but it doesn't call out specifically anything other than the scheme of delegation might not be the right way of working, and there's been some changes since then. I couldn't quite figure out what that has to do with the rest of it.
Okay, I can't remember specifically that decision. But in terms of, I do remember the concept is in effect the scheme of delegations. The scheme the scheme at that point hadn't gone over the allocated budget, but had, if you take into account the later phases. And I think the referral was probably, I think it was to yourself, Bryn, but I don't think it followed through. And then Audit for a discussion as to whether that met the relevant delegations. That's not really a matter for myself, but fundamentally the decision at the time was within budget. Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
I think that confirms or aligns with at least
Yeah.
what I was thinking, which is
Yeah.
it looks like for a long time either there wasn't knowledge of overspend and therefore decisions were made assuming that there wasn't an overspend, or at a certain point some of the money got front loaded a bit. So there's a point in one of the papers from I think 2022 maybe where instead of 6 and 6 mil, it suddenly became 11 and 1. And looking at the one, I'm thinking that's at that point in time, surely you know that that's going to overspill. But because we're starting phase 2 now, it's still within budget because we kind of pretended a bunch of stuff no longer exists later down the line. And there are a few of those kind of points where I don't know, which bits were misunderstandings or were third parties or were management, officers or were councillors or whatever. And I think that's part of the challenge here is there's a lot of moving parts. And without that central PMO, that was always a challenge to try and keep an eye on all those moving parts. But the reallocation of some of the work streams from one area to another and the total pound value of that never seems like it quite made sense up to the point where there was I think was it Debbie that triggered the investigation into the total amount and how much we were going over by. But yeah, so that's just what I want to check. Is it felt like a lot of this stems from the kind of open-ended contract aspect, which you talked about the different types of contracts last summer, and how sometimes it works really well and in this case really doesn't, rather than the specific decisions that happened later that all had that pattern of not identifying that it was going to lead to greater costs, even though it then did.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, once you're in contract, it's a moving train. So, and specifically what the form of contract, which is NECA, which is a fixed price against a scheme that's supposed to be the thing you've bought. And we entered a contract into something that as outlined here, we didn't fully understand what we were buying. But you can't stop, or you can stop that contract, but the act of stopping the contract will probably cost you more than finishing it. So you, in effect, the key element of part is actually how tightly you're then managing that across the whole of that contract and understanding where the outturn is likely to be. Because also it's an NEC contract, the full outturn cost isn't assessed till the end. So it's not like your traditional, those people engineering JCT type contracts, where it's literally you knew day by day exactly what your total costs were. The contract works on a program basis, not an item basis. So you're buying a whole program of activity, and then effectively at the end, all of that is finally costed up to what the totality of the cost is. But you can be really quite tight on that because you get early warnings and such like. As long as there isn't surprises, and in this instance, there has been surprises throughout. So the quantum of survey work that wasn't undertaken at the beginning.
Thank you. I've got some questions about some of the things you just said, but they're always. I'll let other people speak for a bit.
Okay, who's next? Councillor Merritt.
Yes. I just wanted to understand how we deal with staff training and ensuring professional standards with within the organisation. Do we have internally appointed professional heads who, in effect, cover contract management, cover the civil engineering side to guide and ensure professional standards are maintained within the organisation? And are they at sufficient grades to be able to ensure that standards are met, professional standards are met?
So, through yourself, Chair, in terms of just the generality, obviously the point in which I was brought in, we had a number of posts vacant and had done for quite a number of years. Actually, it wasn't specifically around structure, it was about actually recruitment per se. We were acting very much as already outlined in the report, utilising consultants to fill those roles. The problem with consultant is they can't really act on our behalf. So all I can answer in terms of what we're doing now, we have appointed relevant heads on a higher scale, and we're developing other posts in around the programme management. And we have brought together functional teams. So whilst they're not restructured as per se, we're working across the different elements of resource across the council to deliver the capital projects across sort of the York team. So where there is resource elsewhere that's able to bring those to bear. Every council in the country is struggling in terms of, as you'll know, civil engineering, etc. resource, but we have actually managed to recruit some really good people. And you know, we've got some really good civil engineers in, some programme management. We've just gone out for recruitment for some additional, as per the action plan, project management resource, specifically project management, with project management skills. And we've started implementing project management training across all teams, and also standardising the way in which we report project management, because before it was sat within different parts of the authority in different directorates and managed in a different way. I'm not saying any of those were wrong per se, but if we have a more standardised approach, a more open approach, that's able to then look at how we resource across ways.
Sorry, yes. I think I'd ask you if you would still look at the issue about who supervises the training from a professional point of view, and the mentoring all your staff, and that you actually have a structured arrangement in place with someone who's got a specific responsibility from that, as opposed to operating individual projects and so on. The next thing I wanted to ask is the member of the public who spoke earlier asked about some of the governance arrangements, and Jason partly touched on it in terms of the discussion that took place at corporate scrutiny. But in terms of the reporting arrangements to members, in terms of changes to the project, changes to the costs and the rest of it, which had been relatively infrequent previously, I am still not clear from the recommendations how that is going to be addressed in future to ensure that we do get that regularity of reporting, particularly when things are changing fast.
Yeah, so we've already got we already release all the risk registers on a regular basis as a local authority, which is actually quite rare in my experience in terms of that. It could actually have a negative impact, because actually in some instances I suspect people haven't been putting the full risk element in because it can't be made public, because you're in a contract at the same time. So what I have implemented is a two-stage approach, as in when there are risks that can't be made public, they're at least going to the senior management level and at director level, so there's an understanding of those risks, and then at the point in which they can be made public, they're then reported in. We're also providing a much fuller, I hope people that are looking at the risks that are reported externally and openly, we are providing a much fuller quantum of those risks within that reporting. So where there is a known new event, they are very much in there. There is internally within the project team, I think it references, well, it does reference within the audit, the lack of information around CE specifically, the change notifications. That they are now, we have a weekly tracker internally, not just within the sort of consultancy teams as well. So there's a lot, well, it's a no surprise approach, as far as then you can take that to a full open perspective within the contract per se. Because as I discussed in great depth at the last one, there are stuff, because of the nature of the contracts and knowing things isn't helpful for any of us because of the way the contract works.
Councillor Lomas, was it specific on this point?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add that in terms of reporting to members, we have a monthly meeting with myself, Councillor Douglas, Councillor Kilbane, Councillor Revilius, Councillor Pavlovic will be included in that going forward to review where we're at with major projects. So that means that on a monthly basis, members are being updated again on that no surprises basis, so that we understand where each of the projects are, and that will, I hope, reassure you that there is that report back into executive members and the leader and deputy leader to ensure that we're all fully informed in a way that we were not before.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. It's going back ever so slightly to what Councillor Merritt touched on, but I just wanted to ask about sort of capacity of the team and whether you think that some of the issues that have happened could have been spotted earlier on if we had more capacity, and if you feel like you have sufficient capacity now, because I think you know, we know that the council has got no money, but if a programme management officer could have spotted this earlier on, how much could that have helped us sort of down the line in sort of, as you touched on, how much this is taken up of your time and many officers' times, and also the cost to the public in the long term, you know, versus if we have sufficient capacity in the first place. Thanks.
Thank you. It's a real one retrospectively for me to answer because I wasn't here. Obviously, skills, resource, knowledge, and capacity, and also having done things helps any scheme. And notwithstanding, it was well resourced, but on the consultancy side. So I think internal capacity and well resourced internal capacity around capital programming is always very important. We've moved as quickly as we can to bring that internal capacity in. And I stress again that internal capacity in the UK isn't that prevalent. So you're not going to get someone fully formed, knowledge, understanding in terms of. But we have brought some good people in, which is helping the programme. Do we need more people? Yes, but we are bringing more people in. As already outlined by Councillor Merritt, what's important there is that we're wrapping around the training and support for those individuals, because few people given the wages that we pay and also given the marketplace are going to come in fully formed.
Councillor Vassie, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So I've been kind of slightly lost here, I think. I thought that we were going to be discussing the auditors in annual report separately, but this is all part and parcel of the same thing, isn't it? Is that correct? Yeah. So yes. So without going to the redacted part of it then, I have to say, what I find, and I acknowledge that you weren't here when these initial decisions were being taken, Gary. I find it shocking that the issues in this report are presented by the auditor as if there's no victims and no perpetrators. I know that might sound a bit grandiose, and no consequences. And millions of pounds are diverted and no one is held to account. And taking money from over here and putting it over there has no consequences. My residents, and I imagine all of our residents, would be appalled to learn that no one appears to be held to account for decisions that led to £28 million being moved from over here to over there. You've referred, Gary, to, and others have referred to, whether there was sufficient professional training and issues about project management and project management skills. I have to say, I've asked repeatedly at management level questions about project management and commercial management, and was effectively told it wasn't my business. But as elected people, we are ultimately responsible. We're told we're held responsible. And I find it hard to believe that we could get to a place where a contract would be varied after it was agreed, because all of us in our own lives know that if you get someone to come and move a shed or do something in your garden or in your house, once the contract's agreed, any changes are going to cost you, because that's the moment when the contractee adds costs. So it's very notable, and I'm glad that it's in here, but the risk and mitigation on pages 72 and 73 list the kind of issues that are raised by this. And they're very broad, and I think they cover the kind of things we genuinely need to be concerned with, because it's about capacity, it's about an action plan, it's about commercial relationships, it's also about the risk to the council's reputation. And what worries me about this is that I've not yet seen an indication that there's real engagement with the knock-on impact of these kinds of things to a council, to a local authority's reputation over time. And I'd be happy if you could give me some kind of indication of whether you're confident. I mean, you've given some indication, Gary, of some of the things that are happening, that there's genuine change and maybe an idea of what potential there is that's going to come from the change of leadership at the very top, and what kind of size of window we have to really change the way this local authority works, so we don't find ourselves in this situation again. So it's a big splurge.
Sorry, so I've delivered an awful lot. It's not a resume of me in any way, shape, or form. I've delivered an awful lot of capital projects. So you kind of learn. Well, you do learn. We all learn, don't we? So you know, I have made mistakes in capital projects, because if I've not made mistakes, I won't be able to identify future mistakes. I've had schemes that have overspent, but with the knowledge of overspending. So the key here that all the way through every report I've read, and every reporting all the way through until obviously it was asked to be audited, everything looked fine. So it's the reporting of that and the knowledge of those changes. I don't think I've ever delivered a capital project where people haven't asked for a change, because if anybody's, if you do your house, you suddenly think, well, that unit, we didn't want it there, we want it over here. So, I mean, that does always happen in capital program delivery, because as people see it, it's the reporting of that change, and then the implications of the risk of that change, and then making a decision in the full knowledge of that. That's the important thing. So if you want your unit somewhere else, it's going to have an impact on here. We're going to have to replumb this, etc., etc. And that's really the elemental part here throughout that's not there in terms of, and that's from the start to the end in terms of that level of reporting, which it fully identifies already. I'm not saying anything the audit report is not saying.
That you're talking there about the monthly reports, or the lack of monthly reports.
So decisions in terms of their implications on decisions and the cost of those, and the monthly reporting, and etc., etc. So I'm not standing here saying it wouldn't have still cost the same amount, because it might have, because I can't replay that, what's happened from here to there. There are areas that you could absolutely buy, totally knowing what you're going to buy at the beginning, because we say we made changes, what went out to contracts isn't fully formed. It says we might have this here, we might do that here. So that would lead me naturally to say, well, actually, we don't go with a formal contract that says this is a finished product, that we go with one that actually work in partnership with the contract, which are different forms of contract. So there's different approaches you can take. So I'm not answering your question at all. I'm rambling on. To answer the question, fundamentally, we have brought people in, and I'm not saying we didn't have those before, because I can't really speak for before, but I brought people in that I know can deliver capital projects, can identify those risks, report those risks, and also, as of last year, You know, we very clearly reported what those risks might be, and since then we've been identifying what those itemised risks might be. Some of those are not yet costed, so I'm not sitting here saying that there will be a cost to that portico, but we had to take it down. It was dangerous. We had to move quickly, but because of the nature of the programme, that's not costed us yet. So that will factor through in the quarterly reporting, with Debbie's quarter finance report, and the risk of that has already been reported. So we will have that, you know, quarterly reporting regime that's then saying, well, actually, this is the impact. I am confident we have the people in. Are they stretched? Yes, because, you know, we are stretched. But we're identifying those, we're having conversations about them on great granular detail. We're working through solutions, we're looking at if we can make savings very rapidly because the contractor needs to move forward. And as we present ourselves in terms of the next stage of bringing the programme management function properly, so we've got a proper process and thought process of decision making. We're highlighting risks at early days, so the original decision on this doesn't say actually this isn't a fully formed project, for example. Well, the original you can make that decision, we can all make that decision, but it's the knowing in terms of the entering. So I think I know we've got the people around us now that can report to you before we enter a contract what the risks are, hopefully identify and address most of those, but if we haven't, that we're going into the next stage knowing that. We're identifying the full maximum cost of that, the full maximum impact that might have in terms of programme, and then identifying the relevant contingencies in terms of the delivery of those programmes. What I'm not going to say to you, because you've all been, most of you have been around here many times before, all contracts have an element of cost and additional time taken. I mean, not many contracts, and none I've managed to have been of this scale, but all do have an additional cost. As you all know, if you do work to your house, you always end up with additional cost, and it takes a bit longer. But it's the reporting of that, it's the knowing of that that's really important, and then the implications of that on other things, and then the management across all of that to make sure you're mitigating that impact.
If I can respond.
I'll just bring in Councillor Lomas, because presumably a sort of direct response.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Councillor Vassie raised. I know it's really difficult. I know because, as Councillor Fisher knows, I was on Audit and Governance Committee for 4 years, and it's really difficult when you're presented with a report that says something hasn't gone right to not look for who is to blame. But it's not the purpose of this committee to apportion blame. It's the purpose of this committee to look at, do we have the right governance in place to make sure that we can limit the risks of this kind of thing happening again. And I think in particular, you talked about relationships and reputation, and that's really a really important part of this. And so part of the work being done to make sure we can manage the relationships in a really efficient and effective way is obviously to have people in post, to make sure we're not relying on contractors to do that for us, that we have people in place to do that work. And I think another element of that is that you touched on is leadership. And you'll know that this administration took the opportunity with the retirement of the Chief Operating Officer to recruit a Chief Executive Officer, which obviously your administration removed previously. And the intention there is to make sure that we do have in place in senior leadership within the council, somebody who focuses outwards, who has that focus on building relationships, who has that outward looking, outward facing role, not an operating officer who looks at functional operation process within the organisation. And I think those things combined with the changes that have brought more capacity into
the elements around project and programme management will really make a difference and will bring us to a place where we can be more assured of the progress of things like this. And I think it's important to focus on, is the governance there? Is there proper governance structure and process in place? And that's why Councillor Douglas asked for internal audit to particularly look at major projects and to create this report so that we would be able to highlight and uncover those areas where governance was not where it should be, where there were gaps in that governance and control, and it's been a really helpful process to go through. Although I would highlight that a lot of the things have been put in place anyway, and Gary and his team have done a great job building that and putting things in place. And I want to finish by saying I do appreciate it's difficult when you're on this committee and you're presented with something that looks difficult. But I would encourage you to focus on, do we have the things in place now? Have we learned from the things that have gone wrong? Have we taken on board the input that we've been given through the audit process from the senior officers who have come in to work on this? And I would suggest that's a much more helpful place to focus.
Thank you. I mean, I would just say, I mean, I would just say, obviously, part of doing that is understanding what's happened, and that's, I think, is the point that people are trying to do, is to get to a point of where they understand the round of what's happened, and that necessarily involves understanding where things went wrong. And the difficulty with this sometimes is that it's often a small group of people amongst whom it's sort of gone wrong, and obviously that then puts us in a difficult position in terms of how we talk about things. But I think it's just a case of, being careful around those issues. Just whilst we're on, and hopefully Christian will forgive me, you were talking then about senior management, and it does kind of jump out a little bit that the period where there did seem to be quite significant issues through sort of 2024 did coincide with the management restructure. And I think I do just have obviously the exit of the former director. And I just wonder to what extent those issues around the kind of project management across the range of sort of capital projects were considered, in that management restructure, and whether the risks of, things, I guess, falling through the cracks were discussed and considered, and how those were mitigated. And I guess that's probably a question for Councillor Lomas.
I think, Chair, that this is an area where I would ask for advice from Bryn, because it feels very close to discussing staffing matters that shouldn't be discussed in a public meeting.
Yeah, and ultimately the purpose of the restructure was to amend how the team worked. I can't comment on the detail of what was discussed because obviously I was part of that restructure. So I, like Debbie, were affected officers and therefore were sort of outside of the process. I think there is a danger of the committee trying to second guess what has happened in the past when it comes to staffing structures, because we don't know, is the honest answer, whether or not keeping the individual in post, having somebody different in post, all of the changes that were ultimately made has made any difference to the outcome that we sit with today.
Yeah, I'm not asking about the individual. It's a matter of public record that there was a staffing restructure. All I'm asking, and that obviously reduced the number of directors, and yes, that did sort of directly affect the person directly responsible for this project. But I'm not asking about an individual. I'm just asking whether, as part of that staffing restructure, whether these issues were considered and whether it was a risk that, the projects that were being managed.
It's not a question that I or anyone around this table can answer, Chair, because we weren't part of creating that information.
Chair, I mean, the only thing I can say is that this starts in 2022. So, I mean, I can't answer the 24 bit, but the prevalence throughout is from 22 onwards.
The audit report's quite clear that the issues were particularly bad at the late part of 2024.
I think that's
The audit report's clear that was when they became knowledge to
Yes.
officers, not when the issues arose.
Yes.
So that's the difference. That was when we found out about them, not when they happened.
So that's the reporting point, but actually the cost points go right back from 22 onwards, right through to 23, right to later on, late 23. So this isn't a roller coaster. This is a flat line, as in all the way through the reporting, because the nature of the reporting. So when I'm talking about the NEC contract, there was still a qualified NEC contract management involved through Turner & Townsend. They were reporting, and we had a reporting system that wasn't feeding through.
Yeah.
So all the way through in terms of those early warnings and the contract we entered. So putting aside everything else, this is an end-to-end. It can't be pinpointed within a year. And certainly the highlight was early in 24, the request for the audit.
Okay.
I appreciate I'm stepping on your toes again,
This
Christian.
is a supplementary.
Well, my question really is, can we get Connor and Max up, who wrote the report? Is that permitted? Specifically on page 83 of our papers, we've got the bit that specifically talks about the staffing gap, but for me it reads like the gap that caused issues was the gap in project management capacity at the time. But it would be good to get their input on where the challenges lay during that period. But I mean, that's obviously separate to the kind of where the root causes are in contracting and a bunch of other stuff. But is that permitted? Because it would be useful given that we're looking at their report.
I think we're coming back to this report though, aren't we, later in the agenda?
Yeah, but most of them's a private session.
I-
And we don't want to rehash the same conversation later with a different flavour, probably. Just my thoughts on it.
Yes, Connor, are you happy to?
I'm not sure. It's been I'm comfortable commenting on.
Okay, fair enough.
But for the recording, should we just repeat that he says he's not comfortable talking to it? Is that useful?
What I can say is when you put aside that
Sorry, my apologies. Putting aside the specific period, I think the key issue was actually the information wasn't available in that period because there wasn't any reporting internally. Yeah. So it was a lack of the actual detailed information, the contacts that had an issue around the audit. I mean, but it's very clear throughout the audit, and having reviewed every single element of the contract in terms of how we entered, this is a consistent one throughout, and not specific to any specific governance outside of that, because all the reporting throughout is the project looks great. So the way in which then it was reported both to senior management and externally and the open, everything looks great across all the years. It's that bridge, isn't it, in terms of from the professional team through to our professional team in the council, through to senior management and through to the external audit and the decisions that's throughout this. For one reason or another, and I'm not commenting on form, shape, form, I can't, I'm not in that place. And it was a totally different shape and form. But I mean, fundamentally, from a capital programme perspective, the action is effectively to separate that out, create a PMO, create specifically focused, non-directorate based capital programme resource, put training in, all of that's happening. So that addresses all those concerns within that's been highlighted from the audit.
Okay. Councillor Bassey.
Thank you, Chair. So to respond to various things that have happened since you responded, Gary. So on the issue of looking forward and not looking back, I mean, my feeling just is I've sat on too many committees over the years where people say, look purposefully, look forward, and don't take the painful, honest, difficult looks at how you got to where you got. And my feeling is that without that looking back, however painful, and hopefully it can be done without confrontation, because I don't think that helps, but without looking back, I don't see how you can move forwards very often. To respond to what you said specifically, Gary, you did mention the portico, for example. And I think all of us would agree that on these kind of big projects, stuff happens. In York, you can almost guarantee that wherever you go, you're going to find half a dozen Roman sandals and a Viking brooch, and everything's going to come to a stop. That's just where we are. What I think is more concerning, what I think people would find concerning, is that a project can be signed and agreed to start and then have a discussion about whether a substation is in the right place. Because those kind of things, you would imagine a good project manager would go, there are 5 substations in this area that we're looking at. We need to think really carefully about whether they're in the right place, whether things are going to have to move. That's what I'd expect to have been done before a contract would have been signed. And I have a question to put to you, because we're talking about £28.5 million that has been spent as a result of things changing. Would you agree with me that actually, if before we'd started, we'd spent an extra £1 million on professional, the best people we could get in to employ them as part of shaping the contract, as part of informing the council, accepting what you've said, that it's difficult to find good people. But would you agree that having spent an extra sum up front on more stuff might have saved us hand over fist further down? Was it a false economy? Are we involved in kind of not properly?
Totally don't know what was the decision making, because I wasn't in that place. I don't know what fundamentally what were the decision drivers. So what was driving the pace? I don't know. You naturally delivering capital projects. Largely, the more you put up front, the more survey work, the more you know, the less risk there is. But that depends on your funding drivers. So, as already highlighted here, there was a significant amount of funding that had to be secured by a certain time frame. I can't say, because I don't know what the decision points were in terms of what the thought process was at that time.
Given that the auditor's report says that there were issues about management skills and project skills, if I've understood what I've been reading here, that would tend to suggest that there were skills missing at key moments that might have helped get a better outcome. I appreciate you weren't there, so you can't comment on the detail of it.
No, there's some good. Sorry, speaking of you, carry on.
I was going to say that would it be fair to consider that there might be an issue within the city council of trying to do things on the cheap, on the hurry up, of not saying, well, this is a major project. Should we really redouble our effort to make sure that we've got maximum opportunities for the skills we need to get it right, even when there are contingencies?
Through you, Chair, possibly can't answer that, because I mean, what I can say is, given a different situation and not knowing what the pressures were, I would have spent more time undertaking survey work, but we weren't at that time without resource. Notwithstanding, I actually don't fully know what the internal resource is or the individuals. I can't possibly. We had also, but we did have, you know, we had very good external consultants and such like. So we weren't without resource, but capital projects, the more you prepare, as anything, you know, the more you prepare, the less risk you enter into. But that preparing takes longer and costs more. So, and as you know, we all national and local capital projects, there is often a push and a rush to get to site. And I don't know what the context was in terms of that push and the rush, other than there was a specific funding requirement. But as highlighted in the report, we entered a capital scheme without all the full knowledge of the detail, which is still hitting us now in terms of the stuff we're finding. There are survey methodology that could have been applied that would mean that we would have known that initially. Whether or not that would cost less is different. What it would have done is set the budget at a higher level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
You at last. First of all, I've listened very carefully to what's been said, and the first thing I'll say is I don't think the difference between a chief operating officer and a chief executive would have made a great deal of difference in this. After all, a chief operating officer's job is to make sure the council operates correctly. A chief executive might have a more exterior role in liaison, but I don't think it would have made any difference. I was pleased to hear Councillor Lomas saying they're now going to get regular reports on finance, because having in my past life been part of a team that was supervising a major contract, if I'd suddenly had an £7.5 million overspend on, so it landed on my desk, as this had on in March 2024, I'd have had kittens. There would have been panic stations to find out what had gone wrong. What interventions did you actually do to get to the bottom of that at the time?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, you're quite right, Councillor Fisher. I'm not sure if anyone had kittens, but certainly there was some serious concern, which resulted in the council leader requesting internal audit to do a specific report on major projects to get a professional opinion of the governance arrangements and what needed to be put in place to avoid this happening again. So what happened immediately was we looked at what needed to be done on this specific project, and also what we needed to do to make sure that all of our major projects would be managed in a more efficient and effective way. And we did that by asking our internal auditors to look at major projects and the governance surrounding them, to make sure that we could put in place appropriate governance that would help us to avoid such things in future.
Thank you. Yes, but then let's get the exact date, May 2025, the overspend suddenly rockets up to 18.5 million. So obviously the Veritas report didn't actually solve the problem of what was going wrong with this particular contract. And the overspend has now gone up to 28.7 million, as is recognised in the report on page 282. This has had a catastrophic effect on the reputation of this council. There's no question about that, and particularly in the northern suburbs, which have seen £14.5 million diverted from the ring road, fueling the ring road, to finance the rest of this project. Having been on this, we had regular meetings with the contract managers from both the contractor, our own contract manager, and senior officers. There was a team put together to make sure that any issues that were arising were dealt with. Was that thought of?
So, Councillor Fisher, I'll start with nobody expected an audit report to put right things that had gone wrong. What we used the audit report for was to check that the things that were being put into place were going to be sufficient to provide the governance needed. So that's what we used the audit report for. Obviously, work was done on the governance processes immediately, but I think as Gary has explained, the overspend didn't happen on a certain date. It has been reassessed and reevaluated and recalculated throughout to make sure that we fully understood and uncovered all of the likely overspend by the end of this project. And so it's not something that happened on a date and then was reported on the date it happened. It's something that we've continued to ask officers to dig into, to uncover what they expected the overspend would be, and we've been transparent in reporting that, and we've gone to scrutiny to talk about it, and we wanted it to be fully covered in the audit report so that we would have that transparent look at what we need to do to, number one, get this back in line as far as we can and get the project delivered. And number two, make sure that we're not in this situation again. So I think it's important that, and we had this discussion where we went to scrutiny and we were talking about, as Councillor Rose mentioned earlier, the movement of work between the work packages and the movement of cost and funding between the work packages. It's more helpful, and officers were really clear with us that it's more helpful to look at the project overall and to leave behind that. We inherited a project had contracts issued in before we took administration of the council, and we have consistently done our best to get that project delivered, notwithstanding the significant issues with the way that the contract was put together, and the risks that carried with it right throughout the project. So we've absolutely done our best, and what we're doing at the moment is moving to a position where we can finish the project, because that's the way we deal with any ongoing problems with it, is we get it finished and get it done, and deliver something that will be absolutely great, I'm sure, for the city. But everybody recognises that this has been an extremely difficult project and a difficult situation. And that's why we've put so much effort into looking at what's gone wrong, what do we need to learn from this, what do we now need to put in place, what do we need to do to change things. So it has been an incredible focus, and I'm really grateful to all officers throughout the organisation who've pulled together and worked on this.
Thank you. In relation to that, I'd just like to point something out. You said in the press the other night that the contract for enabling work signed under the Liberal Democrat and Green administration caused delays and significant cost overruns. If I can just quote you from the report that was presented to Executive on the, I think it was the 21st of January 2025, paragraph 117. This is from the Chief Finance Officer. The York Station Gateway Scheme is to be delivered in 5 works packages. The first package of enabling works involving the diversion of key statutory utilities from in and around Queen Street Bridge to enable its demolition was completed in October 2023. The package of work was delivered by CYC and completed on budget. So I don't see where the overruns were. We've got the Chief Finance Officer saying it didn't overrun.
So that, if I may, so that's more of the live dialogue that because we're getting the CE. So that enabling works unfortunately wasn't completed properly. So some of the utilities were moved in the wrong place, and a lot of the enabling works which were in around putting in ducting to move other utilities at this stage. So we're now at a position on site, and I'm just conscious this isn't probably a matter for now, so Bryn, stop me if I'm saying anything that's out of turn. But fundamentally, we've got a load of ducting that's collapsed that was put in as a part of that enabling works, which means now we're going to have to put new ducting in. It's also in the wrong place, and the number of the utilities have been stretched, so there's not enough slack in the utility to move them, so we're having to put new utilities in. So we're working with particularly power to put those new utilities in. So unfortunately, and it is no way a political thing because you're not involved at that level. But fundamentally, that package of enabling works wasn't undertaken correctly, which has meant when we're doing the work now, we're having delays and cost, which will be accounted at the end because we're now paying for this element of programme, but they're unable to progress elemental parts because of that additional work we're having to do, and we're having to bring in utilities to move things around.
I'll just bring Councillor Lomas down.
Thank you. I think this is another one where it's important to view the project as a whole and not the individual work packages, because what one doesn't exist without the other. So I think it is important to look at the whole, and obviously the officer decision on the contract was made during the pre-election period in April 2023. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about the contract. And once you get into a contract situation, it is then difficult to get out of it, and often costly. So that's what we're referring to when we say what we inherited is that the whole procurement, I think, started in late 2020 and ran on from there.
Thank you. Just to
So
clarify.
I think it's important to look at this as a whole, and not separate it out into work packages, which I think at this point in time are not really meaningful, because of the movement of work and funding and cost between them during the period of time.
Sorry, just to clarify the dates, April 23, was that when the tender was sent out? Contract was signed in April.
That was the officer decision published on get you the 24th of April 2023. Formally award the contract.
Councillor Rose.
Thanks. Yeah, 9th of May was the go live date, 5 days after the local elections. But I do think that the works agreement in July 2022 went over the amount because of the additional costs it entailed. But it'd be easy for me to say that's the root cause of everything. I think that's perfectly valid. If that's the end of that's the deadline for funding, you have to get something in place. It looks like it mostly did what we wanted it to do for that package one. I don't think that one is the one that's the problem. The problem one is the one that was the 2023 one for package two, which seems like it's the wrong type of contract for what we would want it to do. Even if you can't do fixed price, somewhere in the middle is good, but it seems like there's just no real guardrails in there. And I know that Christian threw away the line around half a dozen Roman sandals or whatever it was, but actually, yeah, in this city, you should be making sure that there's a clause about archaeology in there. And for that to suddenly pop up on the list on page 87 of reasons that there was extra costs, especially because none of us have seen some major news about archaeology at the stations. No amphitheatre's been dug up. That should be accounted for. And considering the amount, considering that contract, I'm really anxious at this point that contract is still live, and it contains still presumably the risk, and there can still be overspend on that existing contract. We might, for all the other contracts for our other major projects, have resolved that problem. We're doing it better now. And by the way, as a slight aside, I think you've been doing a great job carrying a lot of this stuff. I think contract management has made huge strides in City York Council since I've been on this committee first. Since the early warning issues have been resolved as part of the PMO package, all the recruitment that's been going on. We talked a lot about procurement, and Chloe's been in to talk about everything that's been going on there, and that's been amazing as well. There's a lot of really good stuff that's happened since, and it feels like a new contract wouldn't have any of these issues in it. But that contract is still here, and we're still working on it. So I'm really concerned that we might still, this might not be the end of the extra cost. This might not be the final amount. And it'd be good to understand that. And from my perspective, that 9th of May or whenever it was awarded in April contract is the thing that caused everything after that. Because if you'd had a fixed price contract and you were going to vary it to make a change for an officer decision in August 2024 or any of those other dates that there were tweaks, you'd have a discrete cost for that work. But because it's basically a big T&M contract with no guardrails, people just keep working on it. And it'd be like me going into a shop and buying a shirt for however much they want to charge me. And I think it's a tenner. And they go, yeah, pay us £5 now. And then every month for years, I'm paying £5 going, wait, how much is this costing in total? That to me feels like the point of financial irresponsibility. And it might not have been reckless. It might have needed to happen at that timing. We don't have the people to answer that. And we don't have the records in the papers. But is that a fair statement? Or is that just my imagination that 2023 contract that is still live for particularly the package 2 work is the fundamental reason that we then had all the problems with people not identifying things moving in and out, that we've then had spiraling costs that didn't account for inflation, didn't account for land costs, ground conditions, archaeology, utility changes second time round, all that stuff. Is it just this one contract that's...
So there's nothing wrong with the contract, as in it's written fine. It's an
I know it's a technically okay contract, but was the decision of what was created?
And it's fine as long as you know what you're buying. So if you're buying a table, and that's what you're going to get at the end of it, and you get nothing else, that's fine. You just pay for the table. If you want a load of chairs, but you're not asked for them, or if you've not specified what they are, and you've not worked out what legs you want, you're going to pay more because you pay under what's called the schedule of rates. So the fixed fee is a fixed fee, and that's program driven. So that's, it's going to take from here to here, and the contract has to deliver each element of those programs, so you pay them on the element of the programs. If there's any change, and the change wasn't just direct change that was made, the fact that we went into the contract not knowing things, so those things are then costed in the schedule of rates. And that schedule of rates is two things. One is that any contract worth the salt will put a higher price on the schedule rates because it's not the fixed fee. And it adds inflation per annum. So that schedule rates gets more expensive every year. On top of that, if there's any change, you pay for delayed elongation on any elemental part of the program. So if you can't deliver a piece of program at a certain time and it's delayed, you pay a monthly cost, and that can range from 25k to 100k a month. Some of those are still factored through and won't be finalised to the end. So the figure we presented last year was an estimate of that, because that's all we can do until the final position. And there's hundreds of these programme lines. Each one has a knock-on impact, depending, so if you can't get under the portico, for example, when you were scheduled in that schedule, in that programme, because you found out the portico is dangerous, you then got a cost, but you've not just got a cost for repairing the portico or removing it, you've got a cost for not being able to go under there, and that's a monthly. You can't get out of that, that's the contract. What you can do is argue over the costs, and we do. And we actually have a really good QS, and we have strengthened the middle bit in terms of the NEC contract, which so it isn't a factor that they just charge £5, because we're saying, well, no, actually it was £1, or no, actually you could have mitigated that. So there's all sorts of arguments you can make on every item, which we're doing, but at the end of that there is a cost. So the actual cost that comes out in July, August will be the actual cost, and it'll take all those factors in. So as I said last year, it's a predicted figure last year. The outturn will be what the outturn is when the contractor, we're challenging every item through that process.
I'm not in any way doubting that we're not appropriately challenging the costs and doing what we can. The problem is that contract as it exists doesn't have enough of a lever for us on some of those areas for the circumstances we're in, and it should have been designed better, and it should have been written better to include some of those things we've now seen come through, because or we should have budgeted for that larger amount, because we should have identified that those were the scale of the risk. But I just, for me, those two contracts both feel rushed, and they feel like we've gone in not fully informed. And the July 2022 one, we had to slightly rush because we had a deadline that we had to meet. I can't see any valid reason that April 2023 would be seen as an actual deadline, and we should have taken more time at that point to get it signed. And I am slightly concerned about, Bryn, if I may ask you a question about what it would take to get a multi-million pound contract signed during the pre-election period and how that would differ to the non-pre-election period. It'd be really useful to know who would have to sign it off, because we don't have that information in front of us, but constitutionally there must be a.
It would very much depend on what authority it was being signed under in the first place. So if it had been through an executive decision process, an executive had delegated the actions to the relevant director, corporate director, or whoever, then they have authority at that point to sign the document. They don't have to go back to anyone else to say, and I need your sign. So if you look at a lot of the recommendations that go to executive now, it will be Director X, in consultation with Director Y and Director Z, are authorised to procure such and such, and to take all necessary steps to enter into a contract thereafter. So if that's the way the delegation has been worked from an executive decision, whenever that might be, then there's no further referral required back to executive or anyone else. It may be, and frankly, I would hope that the director involved, whilst preparing to do so, would liaise with their relevant exec member, just so they're aware. But if you've been given authority to do something and you do that, then you've acted entirely within the delegation that you've been given. And in some ways, it may well also, it also reflects across to financial limits, that if as a director you are taking a cold decision, shall we call it, then you are absolutely bound by the financial limits that you're given. If executive has given you authority to say, we're going to spend 20 million pounds on a contract, and we delegate that to you, that doesn't then need a further exec decision, because it's already been considered by executive, and the impact of that 20 million pound expenditure has been factored in and dealt with. I don't know whether that helps.
That does help clarify what's allowed, what's not allowed. Obviously, the funding had already been earmarked for the total amount or whatever. So if it's within what had been approved, then it may well be possible for an officer to do so unilaterally. It still feels like when there was seemingly weeks of due diligence left to do on the contracts to identify some of these remaining guardrails and put them in place, that somehow it was rushed through to go live on the 9th of May. And it's just an interesting timing, considering that the leader of the council at the time had decided not to restand at that election. I just think it's an interesting set of timings and events, but I will shut up there for now and leave other people to talk.
That's a merit.
We can spend all night speculating about what happened, given that we don't have the people in front of us. We have an auditor's report in front of us with recommendations. What we need to be clear on tonight is, are those recommendations the right ones? Are there any things missing from it? And are we satisfied that we've done all we can to ensure that the right processes and systems are in place to ensure that there is not a repeat of this? Obviously, part of that is understanding what's happened to the extent that we can. I'd just like to ask two specific questions that have come out of the process. As Gary said, and I know from when I dealt with contracting earlier in my career, forms of contract are absolutely key. The big strategic decisions up front. Can I ask who decided that? Was that something that we asked the contractors, the consultants, to advise us on in terms of the form of contract, or was that a decision that was taken in-house?
Very much consultant-led.
Yeah.
So we've very much moved away from that. So yeah, we're reviewing very much. We're asking for on new schemes where we've got consultants. We're asking for a procurement strategy, looking at various options. And then that decision point is sitting, well, effectively with me or my team, and we have in some instances overridden. Sometimes we've gone with it, depending on that risk base. But that was very much, very clearly consultant-led by the consultants we had on board at that point.
Okay, and the second question is, was there any accompanying advice in terms of the, well, I say advice, was there an accompanying risk assessment of the contract and its contents, and particularly the fact that you had a lot of provisional items and all the rest of it, and uncertainties actually done at the time?
I've not seen one. It doesn't mean there isn't one.
Yeah. And will we have processes in place for future contracts in terms of a parallel risk assessment?
Certainly in terms of absolutely. As I said, new contracts. We're actually doing we're looking at all the different contract options.
Yeah.
Either internally, where it's we haven't got external consultants, or externally. So where as a part of that logic in terms of working through the risk. I absolutely can't say if that happened or not, but fundamentally it's very clear in terms of how we entered the contract and the correspondence between the legal teams, etc. It was the contract, the consultants acting on our behalf, driving that specific contract. But just in terms of answer the questions earlier, in terms of the type of contract, it's not about rewriting that contract, it's the form of contract you use. So there's, within that suite, if you're using NEC, there's an option called C, which is called pay and gain. So you basically, contractors and the contracting authority share pay and gain. So that in effect drives the contractor to be more efficient, and you don't fall back onto a schedule rate. So you share the risk. And the contractor is encouraged to do more survey work once you enter contract up front. And in hindsight, and I cannot speak for anything that happened at that point, that in that instance would, given the lack of knowledge of what was under the ground, and knowing we're in York, and knowing it's a lot of old stuff, and we don't, that possibly would have been the better contract in this case.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Besson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one for Councillor Lomas, actually. Looking through the Veritile report, you will have seen that there are lots of references in here to recruiting, new staff, new resources, new training. Are you confident that the budget is being put in place to be able to deliver that in order to respond positively to the Veritile report?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Vassie. That it's a really key point. I think that we need people within the council that are able to deliver whatever it is that the members decide needs to be delivered. And it's very difficult and challenging as we set budgets in a difficult financial circumstance to make decisions around prioritising where that spend goes. But we absolutely have insisted that recruitment to and support for the teams who are doing project management, who are working in our programme management office, that is prioritised in a way that it has not been for quite some time. And I think that it's important that we recognise that a lot of those functions that can seem a little bit like back office functions, and they can seem like something that just can be struck out when you're making difficult decisions around budget, but actually we know that they are absolutely vital when you have a really ambitious programme of development, and we have absolutely prioritised them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Thanks. I do have some suggestions for what we tweak, but just to ask a kind of final flurry of information. We've focused very much on the station gateway, but the report we've got in front of us is the major projects in general, contracting, and it has a whole section on the Tadcaster Road project. And what it says on the Tadcaster Road project, where work started in January 2023, it says the design brief was not adequately reviewed and agreed at a sufficiently senior level or by all relevant internal stakeholders. There was no mention of how the work would be affected by York races on Tadcaster Road, the impact of subsurface utilities, nor the extensive route network of the mature trees. It has a lot of echoes of what we're talking about here, of not, I would say not doing due diligence, not doing any diligence. I don't know how you can think that the Tadcaster Road work wouldn't be impacted by the races or the trees on the road or utilities, right? I don't know how you get to that point. And I'm astonished by that. It's because it's a small amount of money compared to Station Gateway that we're not up in arms about that and you know, quite annoyed about it. But that and what we've got here in Station Gateway, what we had with baked in inflation in the Explore contract at the expense of council services, what we had with the Salvation Army contract that forced termination after the local elections, there's a pattern of behaviour here in how contracts are dealt with pre-2023. And just to pick up on something Katie said earlier when she said 2020, page 89 says much of the procurement for consultants on York Station Gateway began before 2019. So this isn't just, you know, this is not me trying to pin it on the previous administration, but this has been a systemic problem for a very long time in us not bothering to do the groundwork before contracts. And as John said earlier, or I think it was maybe not, but if we're spending that money up front on people, it pays dividends much later. And that for me is the lesson that we have to learn above all other lessons is you get your design right, you understand all the risks, you understand maximum costs, and you budget for that. And that's what I think we should be taking away. But I guess my question is speculative on your part, because I know you weren't in your role back then, but was that just because it was a cultural problem in the council that this is how everybody did contracting? Was it because of certain officers or councillors or administrative approaches in leadership that they didn't try to make things happen the right way? Like what's the root cause? Because the root cause isn't that we didn't do a design brief once. The root cause is that we just didn't do design briefs properly. And it'd be good to make sure that we know now that we're definitely going forward on better ground on that, because we have actually tackled the root causes.
I can't speak for myself, so I can't be drawn into that. I concur that the audit's saying that. I mean, for one reason or another, we've run into project after project without that initial design phase. That might be absolutely fine, but it's the documentation of the reason for that. Because sometimes you have to chase funding for one reason or another. Well, you don't have to, but it's the decision as to why you've chased funding. I believe Tadcaster was similar. It was a funded programme. So there's a reason to move quickly to draw down the funding. Whether or not we should enter those risks, I don't.
I guess I take your point, which is that it's about making that informed decision.
Wouldn't in that instance, but the decision point at that time, I just don't know. I wasn't there.
I think it's interesting that the April 2023 decision was in accordance with the decision of executive in November 2021, because if we thought that in 2023 we didn't know much about the Station Gateway risks and budget, when that was made in November 2021, I imagine that we knew even less about it, and you know, that's where we got to. And I think for me, that's the thing that we're missing from the audit report, going back to what Dave said, which is very valid, that we should be focused on, you know, what are our recommendations going forward. I don't think you should be able to sign off on many hundreds of thousands of pounds or millions of pounds of increased costs with insufficient briefings during a pre-election period on the grounds of an exec decision 2 years earlier. So if there's something that we can take as a learning from that as ANG and take a look at how we can, and it might be scheme of delegation, it might be some other part of the constitution, but make sure that we genuinely have adequate cover, that people don't go, oh, well, I can just kind of borrow from phase 5 costs and say that it's within the existing budget and I can make a decision without having to get approvals at the right level. Because for me, that April 2023 contract that we're still, as you say, we've got a slightly clearer estimate because we're closer to the end more than any other reason. But we're still going to see those increased costs coming through as things still continue to have those problems that we've experienced for years now. And it's because we didn't have the appropriate guardrails in place for writing that contract, and we've been paying for it ever since. That, along with those project management aspects and things that we have been learning in other areas. I'm not saying it's just this one thing, but the risk on everything else is a couple of million. It wouldn't have spiraled that much without a contract that allowed us to spiral that amount.
Any further comments then? No. I thank you for your time this evening, Gary. Obviously, we've got the sort of report of suggested changes and how things are going to be worked out over the next few months. And I think you've said you'll come back in September.
Yeah, happy to come back. I've also asked Audit to review in 2 months as well. So we've got a constant sort of learning experience in terms of making sure that what we're doing is aligned to what we said we'll do.
Okay, and I think we received, sorry, Councillor Merritt.
Yes, Chair, it's now past 7:30. We've been going for over 2 hours. Can we have a short adjournment for 1 second? But more particularly, I'm concerned there's a number of other items on the agenda, and I actually have some questions I wish to ask in the private session on the item that we've just been discussing. I'd like to suggest it might be sensible that we adjourn some of the items and have a further meeting to deal with the rest of the agenda, depending on what other members feel, because I don't think it's reasonable for us to keep going for hours and hours and hours, because there's a lot of business left.
Well, I think if we come back at say 7:45 and then see how far we get in the sort of following 45 minutes or so, and then we could take a view on whether we need to adjourn any of the later items.
But will the director still be here for the private session? I'm conscious he has to get a train back to Hull for a start.
Chair, I'm staying overnight tonight. Last minute off. I've looked at
That's heroic. That really is.
No, I'm not. I need to get Chair. I need to get a train in 10 minutes.
You're protected by the Constitution, Gary. We have a hard stop in the Constitution. It's all good.
I've got to start, but yeah, we need to finish in 10 minutes. I've got a train.
Just to round off the previous item then, so obviously there is a programme of sort of issues that are being followed up on. I know we got from the public speaker a few other sort of suggestions for how that might be improved, which it might be worth just forwarding to you so you could see whether that can be incorporated. I mean, as a sort of general point, it does seem to be a kind of perfect storm of everything that kind of can go wrong with this sort of contract going wrong. Like I say, this sort of particular contract that was signed, the changes that were made, the sort of decision reports and financial reporting on those, the sort of staffing issues we've suffered. So it's been kind of, in a sense, everything that kind of can go wrong sort of has done. But I think hopefully we can kind of get back on the right track with those changes and sort of ensure, really, having been through it, that it doesn't kind of happen again. Very briefly.
It's only a short one, but everything that can go wrong has gone wrong is the point. The contract's supposed to protect against that. And then the early warnings, I think that's the thing that we've not seen come through. So in the updated PMO with all the training, that focus on making sure that we do have accurate estimates at all times, not just we review it yearly. I think those are the two things that it's good for us to make sure we've got covered off.
Yeah, I just think it's just needs to be a bit wider than the contract, because clearly there were other issues that even a perfect contract wouldn't have solved. So just bear that in mind. Okay, if we take a break there until 1:45. Right, thank you. We'll restart the meeting. If you could take our seats. So we've had a slight rejig of the agenda, and we've removed a couple of things we think we can do: the counter fraud plan and the progress report. So profuse apologies to Jonathan. We'll put you on first next time, and you can be off super quick then. But hopefully that'll just lighten the load a little bit. But if we move straight on then to the revised Joint Standards Committee procedures and associated amendments.
Thank you, Chair. So members have got in front of them a revised version of the procedures that the Joint Standards Committee will use for dealing with standards complaints. This came about because the committee itself recognised that there were some significant changes that needed to be made. So the committee has gone through it with both Mr. Koss, who's the head of legal, and Julie Gallagher, who's the head of democratic, and have done a comprehensive rewrite, essentially. It went back to that committee twice and ultimately was approved unanimously. I think Councillor Stewart was present at the time. So if you want confirmation of any discussion, he's sat with us, but probably not. So it's presented to this committee, having been considered by the operative committee and been considered unanimously acceptable for that. There's then a slight amendment to be made on the back of that, which is a recognition that at the moment we have a slightly curious situation in Article 7 of the Constitution, which sets the minimum quorum for any meeting at 4. Even numbers of quorums are always a bad idea anyway, I find. But beyond that, we know it's caused problems in the past. The recommendation is to drop that to 3 for all non-specified committees. That would very much accord with, if you look at the sorts of quorums that are required elsewhere. So particularly council is essentially a quarter of its members, and so on and so forth. So it's bringing it down to a reasonable level. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Fisher.
Microphone, Councillor.
I've been through this with fine-tooth comb and joint standards. It will streamline the process. It will make it fairer, and it will also reduce the workload on councillors through some unnecessary meetings. So I'm happy to move it unless anyone has any particular reason for wanting to discuss it further.
Councillor Merritt.
Yes, I wouldn't normally interfere in something which has been approved by another committee, but I'd just like to question one thing on this. On page 105, paragraph 2, which says where the MOs are complained to the relevant witness and obviously has a conflict of interest. The MO will refer the allegation to the chair and vice chair of the Joint Standards Committee, who will together take over the MO's role in the procedure. Now, the MO's role in these procedures is quite extensive, and some of it's, obviously, professional and technical to a degree. So I was a bit concerned at that paragraph because I'm not sure that's the appropriate way to deal with that situation. You need some procedure, but yeah.
I think the reality is that the number of times that I am going to, speaking as the current MO, that I am going to be the complainant or a witness or conflicted is going to be so low because I tend to sort of step away from these things. It's unlikely to ever need to be invoked. I suspect that the alternative is that perhaps if you want to make an amendment to that, we instead make that the 2 deputy monitoring officers step into my shoes in that case, which in some ways is what they're for in the first place. That's why I have deputies. But I'm happy to take thoughts from the committee.
Okay, that's Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I kind of echo the thoughts of yes. If the next MO likes to complain, then we might find it slightly more arduous as a procedure. The only other thing that occurred to me on that was that the MO is not a councillor, and that is an important part of that role and whether therefore it's the chair and vice chair will take over the most role in the procedure with support from X officer or something else. I think it does make sense, and I think that the lack of expertise in chair and vice chair compared to the MO, whilst there is some, they are the people who've been appointed by the various parties as being the people who should be running those proceedings. But it does feel like in isolation, just the sentence there without more leaves it to them to have unlimited workloads and no support, which isn't ideal.
Whether you want to take Councillor, given that Councillor Fisher has been involved in the process, and obviously likewise Councillor Stewart, whether you want to take their soundings on any suggested change. Sorry, in the middle of meeting.
The principal area where this will come, where the substitution is most pertinent, is in doing the initial filter to decide whether the complaint is in fact within scope. That's where, because the monitoring officer doesn't have a great deal of involvement in most cases in joint standards procedures, but it is filtering out the complaints that are not in scope, are frivolous or vexatious, and that's where the chair and vice chair would be able to do that quite adequately, I think.
Okay. That's
I guess the obvious question, just Bryn, is there anything that you think we could put in writing there that just massages that challenge potentially? If there is as I say, I think for me it's just with support from, and I don't know who would be the officer side equivalent, but head of democratic services or some other role that might be just takes the edge off.
I suppose all you would need to do then is add after the word procedure with support from the deputy monitoring officers. Does that seem reasonable?
Yep. Nobody's arguing.
One
of.
For the record, that was Councillor Christian saying one of to add into that sentence, just so that we know where it came from later.
Okay. The only other thing raised with me was paragraph 56, I think. Just in terms of taking into account previous, having a sort of register of decisions.
Yeah.
What the sort of timeline for sort of disposing of those is, whether they just sort of stay there forever. What if a decision, it wasn't didn't go through the process kind of thing and come to a formal view, it was sort of informal earlier stage and that's sort of hanging on the record?
I think the point would be that any decision that results in action, whether that be an informal resolution or a formal resolution, would be recorded. And then that forms a picture for the committee, assuming that they have made a determination as to whether or not that an investigation has been concluded. It then gives them a broader picture of a pattern of member conduct. So, if you have a member who is repeatedly engaging in a certain type of conduct, at the moment, the way the system works is every time it's dealt with, it's just looked at in isolation. This is very much about addressing that so that if you have a member who is engaging in that pattern of conduct, there's a formal reference in the process to, and we can use that when we're thinking about sanctions.
Okay. So there is a bar of if action is taken.
Yeah, if obviously if a complaint is submitted and doesn't meet the threshold and no action is taken, then it's recorded as dismissed and an end of. It's only when we actually need to take action of any kind that then there's a record made of this was a finding that needed to be dealt with.
So Rose?
Other than the points already made, I'm happy with all the rest of the joint standards bit. However, the paragraph 7 on 102, which is the other change to the major constitution, Article 7, I'm less sure about, and unless someone jabs me in the ribs and reminds me that we've already talked about it before, dropping executive and all scrutiny committees and ANG and planning from 4 to 3 members is a sizable change to our quorum that we've discussed before, but we chose not to previously recommend that, as we want to blanket say there should only be 3 on all of those different committees. And I don't generally think we struggle to hit 4 members on some of the sizable ones, but when we have you know, we had recently a committee that met to not meet, as it were, and we still had to try and be quorate for it. So it's, I understand why we want to look at it, but it feels like there's more consequence to that decision than it's not part of the joint standards change, right? It's a separate change. It's just
It's
been
a separate change,
flagged
but
as
it
part of it.
facilitates the process of the joint standards when it comes to assessing issues at the end, to ensure that we continually get a core committee to deal with any standards complaints that come in.
But I think for joint standards, I have no problem with it. And actually, I don't have a problem with the final bullet point, which is any other committee of the council. But those core scrutiny, A&G and planning, it feels like a drop from 4 to 3 is significant. You could end up easily in those situations with, you know, a very small number of people
Absolutely.
pulling a bunch of decisions.
But as I say, if you look at the way that paragraph works, the quorum for council is basically a quarter plus a fraction of a person, which is significantly less than you have for all of the other meetings. And that's perfectly lawful and it's perfectly ordinary for most authorities. Executive under this has a quorum of 4 members. Executive can comprise only 3. In law, you only have to have 3 members on the executive. So if the authority chose to go to that minimalist route, its executive would never be quorate.
I think we might change the constitution if that were to happen in a few ways. But I do take your point, and I don't have any opposition to it if the rest of the committee agrees. It felt like it was worth more of a conversation than PS. We've got a bullet point that changes all of our quorums. But I think 3 or 4 for me isn't significant. It's just that the drop from 4 to 3. It changes the flavour of how committees work. There are groups that have 3 members that don't have 4 members on various committees, and it would change who could have a unilateral vote on a committee, etc. So just flagging it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a question for information. Paragraph 29 talks about the investigation report being prepared within 3 months of referral. I'm just wondering why that is so long. For people who go through this, and I can say I've been through it twice over 25 years where people have made allegations. It's a nasty period of uncertainty. And the longer it goes on, the more stressful it can be. So I'm just wondering why it's 3 months and not 6 weeks, or, you know, whatever, another sum, why it's stretched out. Because after that, there's another 6 weeks before a hearing takes place, and there's presumably a period where initial discussions are taking place. It's quite a long.
It is. It is reflective in part of the fact that this is not something that the council has resourced to do. These are additional to the duties that the investigating officers carried out day to day. So they have to factor that into their workload. There's also the fact that, you know, potentially we have to investigate, we have to interview witnesses, interview the member, collate all that information. 3 months is actually a relatively short period of time to do that. I've run and seen complaints in the past that have taken 2 years to investigate. We've had one here that took a year, involving 3 members with three separate complainants, and by the time you come to the end of that process, the report on that, for example, was 90 odd pages long. So it's about the practicalities of, if they can do it quicker, they will. But we need to set some kind of timescale, and 3 months should be enough to do everything. And I absolutely get that there is an impact on members doing this. And it is, you know, it is the challenge that we face as officers of trying to balance the needs of not putting additional stress on anybody whilst doing the job right at the same time.
Okay.
Okay, are we broadly then happy then to accept them as is, I think, generally, subject to that minor amendment?
Well,
yeah.
Hey, if nobody else is raising the point that I've made, then that's not going to win a vote, is it? So we've got the one wording change we've agreed. If everybody else is happy with the 3, I'm happy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we move on then to item 12, which Sarah we're going to skip items 10 and 11 on the Counter Broad Plan and Progress Report and move on straight to item 12, which is the Internal Audit Work Programme.
Good evening, everybody. Conor Munro, Assistant Director, Audit Assurance. So the item I'm here to present to you all this evening is our Internal Audit Work Programme for 2026-27. The purpose of presenting it to yourselves is to get your approval for the work to commence and allow the timely deployment of our resources to delivering it. So in accordance with our professional standards, the global internal audit standards in the UK public sector and our internal audit charter with the council, we're required to develop a risk-based programme of work. When taken together, the outcomes of that work allow us to arrive at an opinion on the strength of the council's risk management, governance and control arrangements. That in turn helps to support the council in writing its annual governance statements. If we work through the report, on paragraph 9, page 162 of your packs, that's just a nod back to the 28th of January meeting, where we presented our consultation report and sought your views on the work programme. No problem. From paragraph 10 onwards, which cover into page 162 into 163, we just give a little bit of background to the strategic context. So with the settlement recently announced on the council's budget and its and the challenges that represents and the contribution ultimately that internal audit should be making in that space. So what we need to do in developing the work programme is go through a number of risks that the council is exposed to from its strategic risk register, consider the key strategies and priorities that it's working on, consider our own views on risk and what we see across the sector. What that means is we ultimately programme in a series of audits which we put into buckets, largely which table 1 refers to on page 163. So tend to be strategic cross-cutting in nature. Maybe if all financial systems are prevalent in there too, technical and projects, and then service areas as well. So figure 1 then explains how we distribute effectively our days in delivering that service. Now, there is something I need to bring to the committee's attention, going back up to page 163 on paragraph 20. It talks about the overall level of service for 26-27 being 1,023 days. Now, since drafting that report, we've agreed and finalised a 10% reduction in service for 2026-27. So the figure quoted in paragraph is now incorrect. So we consider the level of resource retained within that service to be sufficient to allow us to deliver a body of work to then deliver an informed annual opinion. So it effectively constitutes 10% reduction. Obviously, we are not immune to that in the same way other services are. So just as a correction, it's 1,023 days. It's now about 927 days that we'll be delivering next year. We've broadly, Jonathan is no longer at the meeting, but we broadly split 50-50 in terms of the split and the reduction that we needed to achieve. By now, the committee will be familiar with the do now, do next, do later system of prioritisation, and figure 2 and table 2 put those together in terms of the context that we apply in prioritisation to arrive at the programme. The key part of the report itself begins actually on page 167, which is Appendix A, where we have set out our indicative internal audit work programme for 26-27. Indicative because we have a flexible approach to planning, so we will be revising this as we go through the year in response to changing need and circumstance, and as we hear from the views of the committee as well. So at this juncture, really just looking for questions, comments, and hopefully this committee's approval for our intentions for delivery over the next 12 months or so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Issues to raise? That's Rose.
No, thank you very much. It's a really good report. I really like the work plan. The work pays for itself every year. You know, the things that we find, in fact, you know, more than pays for itself. My only question, I guess, is the combination of the drop in 10% resourcing, and also some of these are quite large. So contract management, data quality, financial maturity, licensing, they're very big buckets, and therefore I don't know to what extent you can get deep into those issues across the gamut rather than picking up one aspect of them. But I just wanted to get if there's anything that you guys do to, if there's anything you might have to drop out of here, I guess is the bigger question for to be able to deliver the work plan.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rose. So it is over-programmed in and of itself, you're right. So we won't be delivering all of these engagements, you know, roughly this time next year necessarily as well. Some of the audits are broader and ever so slightly shallower than other audits, and some are deeper and more focused. And it would be for us, initially we have some views on what they might well be, given the size of the topic and how we can slice it up and make it achievable. Sometimes it's about following our nose as well, and if we identify something and we feel it needs further investigation, then we will pursue that. And sometimes it's in those early planning conversations as well with the client teams, and they might make requests of us in addition to what we'd intended for that audit. And you know, by and large, we would be able to fulfill that. So there's a combination of breadths and depths of coverage that these audits will represent, and in and of itself, a larger program than the days would suggest that we could deliver. Yeah.
That's Merrick.
Yes, two minor questions. I mean, I've just had a look at this year's programme and the things that got left over, and I can see that a number of things have covered. But there was one that has dropped off that I just wondered what the sort of thinking was behind it, and that's the one on the management of York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority funding. The Combined Authority gives this council very large sums of money, and there's a limit to what we can do as an Audit and Governance Committee up there to look at what happens within the spending, which the auditors, well, yourself wearing a different hat, tell us is obviously adequately covered by the constituent authorities. So hence my question.
Which you may well then answer in and of itself. It's actually a question of commissioning more so than anything, because you know, is it a City of York Council audit? Is it a North Yorkshire Council audit? Is it a combined authority audit? Initially, when envisioned, it was perhaps more around so I think it said combined authority funding, didn't it, something like that. I think it was actually more intentioned around how the strategic and place-based plans have been co-developed, and the involvement of the constituent authorities in that. So it's not to say that it's gone away altogether. It's still part of our consideration and entity universe. At this point in time, we're running consultations, I guess, concurrently. So it'll be a case for me to speak with my counterparts and see, well, is there something that we can tackle together on this? So yeah, it certainly isn't necessarily off the radar as such, and hasn't been forgotten about.
Right. Thank you. The other one I just briefly wanted to ask about was you've got data quality on the list. Will that also incorporate looking at the transparency of the data that the council holds, that it publishes, and whether it publishes it in the correct format, meets all the transparency code requirements?
Not as intended in this draft work programme. So we actually have a data quality audit underway at the moment, and what it's looking at is key systems. So we're actually looking at adult social care system at the moment, and looking at the various input controls that would, you know, prevent data quality issues, but then the checks that are done retrospectively on data as well, using our analytical software as well, to be able to hopefully identify things that might well have just slipped through the gaps and advise on improvements. With regards to transparency specifically and the requirements of the code, that isn't something which currently that audit would be looking to review. It would be looking at another major system and applying the same kind of logic to that.
Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to ask you some questions about comparators. So, first of all, to understand the degree to which you use comparators as benchmarks within Veritas when you're compiling these reports, and to get a sense of how comparators might be used to help local authorities better understand the context of their own performance. Because my feeling is, as a councillor, that all too often I feel just like we're a goldfish in a goldfish bowl and there's no one else there. We look at our performance and we simply look at it in terms of where we were last year or the year before, but we don't really get a sense of the bigger picture. So could you explain to what degree you use comparators when you're doing your analysis of a local authority, and the degree to which you might make that information or do make that information available to other local authorities as part of the training that you refer to and the reports you produce, to enable us to get a better sense of context when we look at our own performance?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Vassie. Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say it's certainly one of the beauties, as it were, of being set up in the way that we are at Verito, in that we have the opportunity to work with other local authorities and see what works well elsewhere and perhaps what doesn't, and advise of potential pitfalls that might come about that as working in a certain way, or potential upsides in pursuing another way of working. So I would say we do that on an engagement by engagement level, an audit by audit level, and we bring in that sort of knowledge and experience and insight to be able to share with client teams, whether that isn't strictly data led or not, and say, here's a percentage of performance in area X, you're at this figure, that's lower than what you would expect. Often you will find that the service areas themselves have the nearest statistical neighbours, or they'll have groups and networks that they'll be able to benchmark their own performance against, or set their own targets for what they think is acceptable level of performance. And that's the sort of thing that we then also go in and audit. So are they actually being attained? Are they set reasonably? And we can, of course, refer to what might be set elsewhere in making that determination, and we would do. So I think it would be wrong of me to say we're coming in with all of this data, which is about this is how this service performs here, and this is how that service performs there. But we do have, thankfully and luckily, a lot of knowledge and experience of other arrangements elsewhere that we can lean into and share with officers to help improve processes. And
do you currently offer that kind of opportunity to York or to other local authorities?
It's standard to the way we operate. So something, say, that York is doing particularly well, might then be communicated to one of our other clients in respect of that's a good model and that's working well, and vice versa. So it is open to effectively every one of our clients that engage with our services.
Thank you. Can I suggest, Chair, going forwards, it may just be that I'm the only person who doesn't see all of this, but that it might be useful for this committee to gain access to that kind of data, either to ask for it on particular issues or to have a general overview in order to inform how we interpret the audits when they come before us. I don't know what others think, but thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is the work programme for internal audit over the next year, and they'll send us the reports, and if there's further questions or anything, I'm sure they're happy to provide it when you get the report, which tend to just come through as they're completed. So I guess look out for them and ask questions. And Councillor Moroney.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I've got two very short questions, and the third one you may rule inappropriate, but I'll try my arm. The first one is, just for the avoidance of doubt, are you proposing to do less days audit next year due to cost savings?
That's right, yes.
Thank you. Second question, how long have you been retained as the internal auditors by us?
Debbie, do you know the answer to that one? Are we up for renewal?
Yeah,
Yeah.
It was on a long-term contract, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
of the tackle arrangement. We own the company, so we're not going to go anywhere else. But we've always had Veritas as our internal audit. Yes.
Given the very sorry, beg your pardon. Given the very long discussion we had earlier about major capital programs, I wondered whether you would care to share any high-level thoughts.
Not to be particularly avoidant on that question. I obviously was in the gallery listening to Gary's responses. I think he's had the fortune or misfortune, however you want to put it, to have the opportunity to review the set of circumstances that allowed that report to be put to the committee. I don't think I could add anything over and above what Gary has said and what's already written in the audit report. So fortunately, there's nothing I would probably put in addition to that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? No. So we're approving this report, so everybody's happy to do so. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Item 13 then is the work plan, which looks a little light, so I'm sure it will get filled with various things over the next period. If there's anything that's right.
Yeah, just I guess for the sake of stating the obvious, can we slap the councillor code of conduct and the two things we've delayed from this one into the next meeting, please? 6th of May only has one item. We've got 3 things that are needing a place for them. It seems like a natural fit.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few things to be added as a matter of course anyway, so that's fine. And then in September we've got presumably Gary coming back with the major project stuff. Okay, if there's anything else people want to raise on that, if you think of anything later, email me and Bryn. Yeah, and then to item 14, which is the internal audit progress reports. And I guess just bear in mind we're still in the public session, so don't stray into the pink papers, but if there's anything anybody would like to raise publicly before we go to the private session, now's a chance. Councillor Merritt.
As I say, I am concerned at the time where we've got to, so I wondered if we could sensibly defer the annexes other than the one relating to the major capital projects to the next meeting, so that we do give them justice and don't. Yeah.
Any issue with that?
No, at all. Yep.
Okay, people are content with that. We'll have a mammoth pack of those next time.
Yep.
Okay, so if we just then, so we've got the covering report. I don't know if there's anything anybody wanted to say on that. Otherwise, we've got the major capital one, and given we have talked quite a lot about that in public already, I'm assuming that anything anybody wants to say is due for the private session. Councillor Ray.
Yeah, only one bit for public, but only because you weren't at the table last time I asked him. It's a slight change to the phrasing. I don't think I've been subtle about the fact that I was quite annoyed at the last meeting about Paula Willison's comments in public participation. We had a brief email conversation since then, but we could have had that in person if she'd stayed for the meeting. And she's not here today, but she was a member of the executive when the 2022 and 2023 contracts were signed, which were the root cause of a lot of the financial challenges we had. And in the press this week said the phrase, "This audit report exposed a catalogue of financial irresponsibility in the Labour's leadership. The result was a staggering 28.5 mil overspend and a critical audit finding." I'm not going to ask you about your opinions about everything else. Obviously, regardless of the percentage that goes to which bit, the contracts played a part in that financial overspend. And so did things like not picking up on it sooner within the current administration. But I just wanted to ask you the direct question of, if you only look at the things that happened since May 2023, the management of the project aspect of it, the management of the contract, sorry, because it's a contract management audit, would you still have given a critical audit finding? Or is that only because we're incorporating all of those pre-2023 contract ones? I appreciate that's a non-ideal question, but I believe that's within what you're able to answer about your report.
If you look at how the finding is written, it's multifaceted. Some of it relates to an earlier package delivery. I think when we talk about how they interact and come together, I think it was actually Councillor Lomax mentioned that it's not, we don't see it as in sort of the packages. Yes, they have all changed in face and structure and how they've looked. We're likely to have possibly identified the same issues. We were looking at the same period. We were looking at from inception of the project to contract 1 to contract 2. I think it's very difficult to say, you know, absolutely we would have arrived at the same critical finding. I think if we were to have our time on this audit again, I think we would have changed. If you, as you rightly said, we've got contract management was the focus of the audit. I think probably what we ought to have done would have had project management as a focus of the audit and have contract management run secondary to that. I think some of the comments that we've had and some of the observations that members of the committee have made would speak to that as well. So aside from, and not to necessarily jump from that question a little bit, I think we would have probably taken a different approach altogether to auditing this area.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if we move then to the private session to ask the public gallery to clear.